Hi, I'm Don Cantor, former co-director of JLIC at Johns Hopkins University and current director at the Richmond Jewish Learning Experience in Richmond, Virginia.
And I'm Alex Ozar, co-director of JLIC at Yale University, and this is the Torah JLIC podcast. JLIC supports thousands of young Jews in their college years and beyond, providing them with the nourishment they need to sustain an upward trajectory of Jewish commitment and growth as they enter the broader world. And the animating engine of that effort, that has always been and will always be Talmud Torah, high-level, richly meaningful, thoughtfully creative Torah learning, ambitiously attuned to the realities of where our students are. On the Torah JLIC podcast, we hope to share some of that Torah with you. Thanks for listening.
Alex and I felt that there was still more material to cover that we didn't get to in our last episode. In this episode, we will try to tie up some loose ends and solve the rest of the world's problems. Okay, Alex, to sum up what we did last time, we mentioned that the students we worked with on campus feel this holistic pressure to get ahead financially. And this ends up impacting not only decisions about what careers they go into, which anecdotally seem more exclusively focused on maximizing earning potential over anything else, but also the clubs they apply for, which, while they may often have the stated goal of helping others, are used as resume builders as opposed to genuine ways to bring more good into the world. And we notice the same things in our own experiences as rabbis, often having our Torah study and teaching influenced by what will be most appealing or eye-catching and will ultimately help us advance our own careers. And we began wondering how this creeped into our own observance of Torah and mitzvot. And that's something that I want to talk about a little bit more.
Yeah, so say a little more about like how that resonates with you, what the worry is you have.
Well, I think one of the solutions you mentioned started talking about how we observe Shabbos and how we relate to it, and we mentioned also things like tzedakah. It seems like so much of what we do is transactional because we're living in a society where everything's kind of based on transactions. we're a capitalist society, and that's how you get ahead, and ends up producing a lot of things that are positive for society. But if we let that define how we live our lives, it can end up taking meaning away from the things that we do as Jews. And a lot of the mitzvot, it seems I think for a lot of us, end up being box checking, things that we do, making sure that we follow the halachot and to the letter of the law. But it seems that sometimes the meaning is lost.
Yeah, I will say, like, I think the problem is really deep and pervasive. Everything that we do, every mitzvah, every attempt we have to focus on what truly matters, or just mitzvot and Torah lishma and avodas Hashem, and our own spiritual refinement. All of that can be used to improve our social standing, to accrue social capital, to just make ourselves look good. And that can be a part of the pursuit of just what we want. And it becomes about ourselves rather than about God or about the Jewish people or about anything else that matters beyond us. And that's kind of terrifying. It's not just frustrating and disappointing, because you can even start to think, is there anything that I truly believe in? Is there anything that I truly care about? Anything that I'm truly committed to? Or does it all ultimately just reduce to something that is to my advantage in this purely instrumental, pragmatic way? It's like, maybe there is no real me, and maybe there's no possibility of actually doing something like avodas Hashem, where I'm doing it for the sake of something that generally transcends me, generally commands me. But I think the most important thing I want to say in response to this worry, without going into the deeper philosophical questions, maybe we'll get there later. I've already fallen into it a bit. Is that, on the one hand, I think these problems have been intensified in modernity, and even in the last 20 years with the just proliferation of social media, and just the extent and degree of the opportunities that we have to leverage every single thing we do for pragmatic benefit. Everything we do can be posted and be applied towards the building of our personal brands, which can then is conducive towards marketing ourselves toward our greater benefit. And so if everything can be done, then it just becomes rational to do it that way. It becomes irrational. You're making a sacrifice of your own value and potential earnings by not doing that. And then how could you not? But I want to say, like, these problems, even if they've been intensified, they're not new. They're fundamentally old. Chazal are very aware that everything that we do, all of our pursuits of Torah mitzvot, can be done for ulterior-based crass motives. They, in general, they're very familiar with the idea of doing mitzvot shelo lishma. This is a very familiar problem to them. So in Chazal's frame, it was primarily you're doing it for the sake of schar from Hashem, which maybe I think for us would be amazing if that's what you were doing. And then trying to think through, well, what's the relationship between doing something shelo lishma and then maybe eventually, hopefully one day doing it lishma, and then like maybe it's worth trying, maybe getting started doing that, rather than holding out for kind of purity of the soul prior to engaging in any of these commitments. That's a bad plan. And in fact, it is a good plan to get yourself started and maybe even employ the incentive structures that are present in the world. So the Rambam's famous depiction of this is, so for children, if you want to get them to learn, so you give them some candy and nuts, and then as people get older, you give them other more refined incentives, and so on and so on, until they're able to do it for the sake of intellectual felicity. But that takes time and work. But the point is that at least there's the possibility of a trajectory. And whether that's grounded or not, if that's just simply an article of faith, I don't know. We should talk that through. But I would say I think it's especially true, and Chazal are like especially exquisitely attuned to these problems with regard to Talmud Torah specifically. Because in Chazal's culture, like the basic medium, this is what they wanted, and they want to put this forward, like the basic medium of social standing and accruing social capital is excellence in Talmud Torah. That's what they want to be the case. They want it to be the case that if you want to be a big shot, it's not because you have the biggest yacht or the biggest house. It's because you know the most Torah and you have the sharpest analytical powers. You ask the best questions at the base medrash. That's what it means to be awesome. It's not you're the best on the basketball court. Because I want that to be the case. But that comes with the reality that people will de facto, just almost like predictably, will use Talmud Torah for the purpose of achieving glory, and even negatively as a cardinal machborba. They're going to use it as an act to cut other people down. Use it for exercise of negative power, maybe even destructive power towards their own self-promotion. That's deeply worrying. And yet, Chazal want all of this. They want us to see Talmud Torah as a site for achieving social capital. They want us to do it lishma, which means they want us to directly confront how hard that is, and work through the problem, the challenge, or like climb the hill of having to transcend our base and ulterior motives in pursuit of something higher. And so like my basic idea in reading these texts and the way Chazal set up the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the way they shape the halacha around it, is that they want us to engage in Talmud Torah precisely as a site for exercising our abilities, our proclivities towards self-transcendence. They want us to get better at it, get better at self-transcendence, and they want us to do that through the vehicle or in the arena of Talmud Torah. It's nothing new. Maybe it's more intense, but I think the problematics are the same and the solution is the same.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about it that way because, and in terms of Torah being a way to accrue social capital, and I wonder if the way that the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is set up, if it's fulfilled in its most ideal form, it can in some way mitigate against that, which is there is a mitzvah, v'higita bo yomam v'layla. So it's not just that there is a chiyuv that I'm subjecting myself to Talmud Torah in a way that I'm to a certain extent its servant, and it's not just mine. And it's something that Rav Soloveitchik talks about. I'm kind of getting the different books mixed up in my mind right now, but I think It's in Family Redeemed in his last essay in there in Torah and Shechina, where he talks about how the fact that the requirement for Torah in the morning and at night is something which helps Torah become not just an intellectual exercise, but something which we have a relationship with and which we're subject to.
I think it's so real and so important. I think part of what the discipline of Talmud Torah and the fact that it's a mitzvah, and this will be true of mitzvot in general, but the fact that it's a mitzvah is a requirement, and it can be minimal, right? So, like, obviously, the ideal is to learn Torah all day. Obviously, for not most people, most of the time, that's not possible because we have to make a living, we have to take care of our kids, we've got to do all kinds of things. But still, the claim, the proposition, the basic idea is that if you have to find some number of minutes during the day and some number of minutes at night to learn something, this is like one minimal maybe just Kriya Shema or done in a spirit of Talmud Torah, or maybe you find some time to do some actual substantive learning beyond that. But if that has to be there, and it has to be bikeva. It can't just be when you happen to have time. So that transforms the entirety of your day and the way that you dispose of your time, because it makes clear that you are not ultimately sovereign over the use of your time. There is something higher, someone higher, who makes a claim on it, and that claim supersedes the rest of your prerogatives. So yeah, like, even if the vast majority of your time is going to be spent on making a living and taking care of your metabolic needs and whatever else, is like it should be clear. We should be making clear that ultimately we're not in charge of our time, and so then de facto our pragmatic instrumental interests are not what are truly in control. And you get this. I read this as partly hopeful and partly substantive, like in the halachic discussion of Birchas Torah, and why on standard practice we make one Birchas Torah in the morning and then don't repeat it every time we then sit down to learn, even though there will inevitably be a hefsek, probably multiple, in between when we say the bracha and learn later. And so normally, if you're going to eat an apple, you make a Brei Pri Ha'etz. If there's a hefsek between when you actually eat the apple, so obviously you need to make a new bracha. That's true for Birchas Torah also. But then if you stop eating the apple for a while, it's been an hour or 72 minutes, whatever it is, and then you come back to the apple, you got to make a new bracha again because you've been doing other things and you haven't been able to eat. And so we should have said the same thing for Talmud Torah too. But the basic response is in Tosot and elsewhere that, well, no, because it's aspirational, hopeful. It should be clear to you, and it should be clear through your conduct, that despite the fact that most of your day is spent doing other things, because when you finally get home, you're finally done with work, and you put the kids to bed, and you collapse on the couch, and you spend that last 3 minutes of wakefulness learning, that shows that that's really that was your primary occupation the entire day. And everything else was stuff you needed to do so that you could get back to that few minutes of learning at the end. And God willing, more. But it shows what's primary. The whole idea is that because that's primary, that's really what you've been at for the whole day. There was never really an interruption. And so there's continuity between the initial Birchas Torah and the learning you do at the end of the day. And so, yeah, that's precisely the hope, is that by making these things fixed and qualitatively, even if quantitatively they're going to be a fraction of what we do, but qualitatively making it fixed and primary, that will transform our relationship with Torah and transform our relationship with everything else. Everything else becomes relativized, and Torah becomes fixed. There's arai versus keva as the traditional language. The hope is that this opens us or grounds us in opens us to a kind of self-transcendence.
So we've laid out the way that it should be, but what's hard is how to get there. That's something that I think we also left unaddressed in last week's episode. Was we did try to lay out the ideal for how things should be as opposed to how they are now. And the one thing that we left out was how to get there. And I wonder if one way to frame it, or at least to start to think about it, is the shelo lishma bal lishma. If we're doing something not for its own sake, we're doing a mitzvah not for its own sake, with the hope and the way that Chazal spoke about it was it's a good thing, and because it should lead to doing it for its own sake, doing it for really the right reasons. But it seems like it's also possible to get stuck in that lowly shma loop, and we have to figure out a way to break out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all always do get stuck in the slowish loop, and I think that's part of the message here. Is these, even if the problems are intensified, they're eternal, and they're eternal both just in the span of history. That every Jew, every human being throughout history has struggled with this problem. Every society has struggled with this problem, and individually, it's a perpetual challenge. You can make a little bit of progress and then fall back, and it's something that we need to reaffirm in every moment. And so, like, what I'm trying to figure out is an ethic of doing precisely that, where we all of the mitzvot we do, we're doing with this reflectively and self-consciously in mind as one of the things that we're after. And part of the mistake is precisely to start thinking there's a like hard dichotomy between doing things lishma or shelo lishma, and that if I'm doing things shelo lishma, that I'm not doing things lishma, and vice versa. And I think that part of the mito shelo lishma bel lishma is like there's a gradient and like a continuity between, you're never really at one pole or the other. You're always either just moving towards one pole or back. And so I think in any time we sit down to learn or daven or tzedakah, we should be thinking about the fact that, and the aspiration that this will move me a little bit more towards the lishma end, and I should be thinking about that. And part of that, I think, there's just the doing of the mitzvah itself, but part of that, I think, is like self-consciously pushing ourselves a little bit. And this goes back to the Wishagod piece we were discussing before, where I think that the best formulation of why this is so hard for us, and especially in the contemporary period, why this is so hard is really a function of anxiety and fear. We're scared of missing out on the advantages and leverage we can accrue by focusing on ourselves and focusing on our pragmatic interests. And that's why we feel like every minute that we use, we all waste tons of time. But any minute we are going to be using productively, we need to be using towards the burnishing of our own brands and the just development of ourselves as commodities. But that's really about not having the confidence and the self-assurance. And I think the right theological term for this is bitachon. It's not having enough bitachon to genuinely believe that if we just do what's right because it's right, or what we're supposed to do because we're supposed to do, or what's valuable because it's valuable, or what's beautiful because it's beautiful, that if we don't do that, then we're going to be missing out on too much value. And bitachon then means, bitachon means having the resilience to do these things just because they matter, and trusting that it'll be fine, even if we leave a few minutes of opportunity on the table, even if we don't take every single possibility towards our own advantage. That we'll be all right. We'll still make enough money. We'll be fine. Our families will be fine. We'll still be popular. Our social standing will be okay. And so this isn't bitachon in the sense of, I don't need to work. Everything will be fine. God will just provide. It's bitachon in the sense that I figure out what the right course is, and then I'm going to stick with it just because it's the right thing to do, or just because it's what matters. And I'm going to trust, like allow myself, as both a matter of discipline and self-confidence, that I can let myself stick to the plan. And that, I think, that will come in degrees, and there will always be opportunities to push that a little bit further. So if we're talking about, take tzedakah as an example with easy numbers. So, I feel like right now I can give X percentage of my income, so it should be 10%, but there are a lot of different ways to calculate that. And I feel like I can give a certain amount of money to tzedakah and be fine. And then, like obviously I could afford to give more, but I'm scared because what if I don't need those funds right now, but what if I need those funds a month from now? What if something breaks in the house? So, okay, so I save a little more. But then it's, well, what if something happens a few years from now or something I didn't anticipate? And then it's, well, I want to make sure, what if something happens with my kids when they're adults, and I want to make sure I have money to give them so that they can take care of or what about their grandkids? And then this can proliferate an Eila Davar Sof. And the maximalist version of that anxiety would be, I would never give anything. And then the minimalist version of that anxiety would be like, I give away everything or something like that. But the in between is, I'm right now comfortable giving a certain amount. And I can push myself to give like a little bit more this year, and confront the anxiety that I feel about that, and confront the fear that, what if I need that money? And still, I'm not going to go too far, but I'm going to say like 1% more. I'm going to give a little bit more. And you can think about this in any of these other areas. So I feel like I can afford 1 hour of learning a day. Or if I'm a college student with a crazy number of, I've got a million tests and P sets, and if I don't do well on this one P set, then I'm going to get a B plus in this course, and then I'm not going to get into medical school, and then my parents are going to disown me, and I'm going to wind up living on the street, and it's just, these anxieties are real, and I don't mean I'm making light of them because they can get overblown. And there is, I think, part of the right approach here is actually irony and playfulness, which I think we should talk about. But these anxieties are very real. Like, it actually is a big deal to get a B plus, and of course, if you're planning on going to medical school, it matters. And so I know I can afford. I want to learn, and so I'm going to go to the rabbi's shiur that 1 hour a week. But maybe, you know what? Maybe actually I could make a few more minutes here, a few more minutes there. I could add an extra chavrusa. And would I really fall apart? Would my life plan really fall apart if I had one extra chavrusa? And if you think about it in those terms, as a self-conscious exercise, what I'm going to do is, because I want to achieve greater bitachon, and I want to make myself more capable, develop my aptitude for doing things just because they matter, and for doing Torah Lishma, I'm going to make that extra chavrusa, and I'm going to stare my anxiety and fear in the face, and I'm going to tell it to chill out. And I'm gonna push myself to do this, and I'm gonna work on feeling okay about it and building the resilience over time to be able to, God willing, do more in the future.
Your example about giving tzedakah and the snowball effect that you can have about being paranoid about what can happen in the future seems to be an issue that is not restricted to being a problem with how a Jew should behave. It seems to be something which that kind of an attitude, which is something which is very relatable, is generally unhealthy and to a certain extent irrational. And rationally, at some point, it's important to take a risk. Otherwise, you end up losing out. And that makes me think about how many of the issues that we face as Jews and the challenges that we have as Jews are just basic human issues. And a possible solution or way to try to help us shift our perspectives on things is to shift our perspective on Judaism and what Judaism asks of us, what the Torah and God ask of us. And I want to start with thinking about this, the way of viewing Tanakh. I think it's called Tanakh Begova Einayim, Tanakh at eye level, meaning trying to see the stories in the Torah and in the Nevi'im and Ketuvim as stories that are happening to regular human beings. It's so easy for us, especially using Midrashei Chazal and maybe misunderstanding them to a certain extent, is to view these stories as crazy supernatural things that are happening to people that are so otherworldly and great, that while they're beautiful stories and there's a lot to learn from them, it makes it almost impossible to relate to the actual characters in the story, as opposed to trying to view the stories as being about regular people. And if you think about someone like, I don't know, the story with Rechavam, when Shlomo's son, when he first becomes the king, and he makes this seemingly boneheaded decision when people ask for a little break on the taxes, to turn around and try and show how powerful he is by raising the taxes, which are already fairly high as a result of his father's reign. And it seems like an idiotic decision. Like what a dunce. Unless you think about, look, someone in that position, here he is. His father was incredibly successful, and he has his father's advisors who are there and telling him, look, this is probably the right thing to do. We know Shlomo had high taxes, but maybe it's time to give people a break a little bit, and this is a nice way to start off your reign. But then you have his friends who understand him and his problems and the things that he's dealing with, and that, you know what, maybe it's important for him to show that as a ruler, that he has his own strength and he's independently a strong ruler and capable. And if he starts off by just capitulating to the people, what kind of tone does that set? And is that a responsible thing to do as a ruler? And so just to look at Tanakh stories as happening to real people as a way that can change the way that you see Tanakh. And I wonder if, to a certain extent, we need to see mitzvot as in a similar kind of way, and that sometimes it's easy to relate to mitzvot as being things which are like, I'm supposed to do this. I don't really understand why, but I'm doing it because like it affects something in the metaphysical, mystical world that I don't really understand, but I know it's a good thing, so I'm going to do it that way, as opposed to trying to have like kind of Yahadut Begavai Naim, have Judaism at some sort of eye level, which I think is something which Rabbi Jonathan Sacks was an absolute genius with, and may have been, of all the brilliant things he did, the most brilliant, or at least maybe the most important thing, was to explain Judaism in a way that demonstrated how it affects regular human beings and how the Torah is tailored towards helping us live life on this world, in this earth, so that we can focus just on this, and whatever's happening metaphysically is going to happen metaphysically, and we have no idea what's going on with that, and we never will. But that doesn't matter because there's so much going on here.
Yeah, I think it was really, really well put and helpful. And my view on this is just like, we just are human beings. We're never going to be anything else. Chazal put this in a different way, making a slightly different point. Maybe like the Torah is not given to angels; it's given to human beings. So like, there's no option of doing anything else. There is no real option of engaging in Torah mitzvos or life in as anything other than a human being. And it's like when Chazal are also like, you know, the angels are famously unsure about this. And Moshe comes up to give the Torah, and the angels are like, "Whoa, what the heck? Like the Torah belongs up here." And they terrify Moshe. They threaten him, and God's like, "I'll take care of you," and gets him out of there safe. But like there is a perspective represented by the angels that Torah ought to be something transcendent and angelic, something that involves a kind of being that is not bound up with basic human needs and weaknesses and frailties and all the just like extremely silly things that make up who we are. And that's the angel's view. And I think it's a certain kind of philosophical view and a certain kind of theological view that a lot of religious people have, a lot of just intellectuals have, that we ought to be something other than human. We ought to be minds or souls or hearts. And actually, God's view is that we're supposed to be human beings, which includes the mind and the soul and the heart, but also includes the stomach and the liver and all kinds of just like crazy, silly nonsense that we're bound up with all the time. And so the only thing we have to do, and like this is what exactly what Hashem wanted. This is the other midrash with should God's debating with the angels about whether to create the world, and right, MS. I'm not going to get the midrash exactly right, but angels say like, how can you create human beings if they're going to like flagrantly violate the virtue of MS all the time? And Hashem takes MS and throws it to the ground. It's like, no, that's the kind of MS that I want. I want the kind of MS that actually flows from human beings doing human stuff. And it's going to start from total messiness and greatness. There isn't going to be a linear trajectory from the falseness in this, and using this jargon set, the falsity of human existence. There's no linear trajectory from the falsity of human existence to truth in the divine sense. But Hashem says that's not I don't want truth in divine sense. I want truth in the human sense because that's interesting. And so part of with all of this, part of what I'm thinking about is actually just like, what does it look like given those constraints? Given that we're not going to be anything other than human, we shouldn't aspire to be anything other than human. And we're going to be like riven through with falsity. What does it mean to achieve some measure of fully human terrestrial truth? And through what forms of discipline? And then just going back to what you said earlier, like, yeah, I think these are.
Wait, can I just stop you right there? Because I think that's such an important point that you just made. And you're going to make another important one, and I'm going to forget about this one. If we're talking about how to break the lowly shema loop, I think having that kind of perspective is really important, because often when we struggle with doing a mitzvah and there's something we really don't want to do, I really don't want to wake up for minyan in the morning or whatever it is, we kind of muscle our way through it sometimes if we're lucky, and muscle our way through that the whatever Yetzer is forcing us not, or is trying to get us not to do that. And often it can be because of some sort of like, you know what, I'm going to do it because like there's a mitzvah and it's going to be great in Shemayim, and even though I don't really like it, and that's the motivation. As opposed to what you were just saying, what you laid out is we can recognize the fact that things are messy and we're not always going to measure up. That shouldn't discourage us. The fact that we don't measure up should not discourage us, because that's just the way that things are. But that has to be balanced with a certain amount of trying to push ourselves further to do the right thing. And so if the lowly shema is just some sort of a recognition of the fact that things are messy, and right now I'm just not the person who's doing it lishma, I'm just not. But as we keep on doing those mitzvot with that kind of perspective, which is has to come along with a certain sense of humility and an ability to live with the fact that we're not perfect, and to accept that and embrace that. That's the kind of lowly shema that we want.
There are two really amazing classic texts that come to mind on this. So one is the Rambam's Igeret Teman, Igeret Hashman. So the frame is that there are people who have a group of people who, under force of persecution, have confessed allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad, and there's some crazy rabbi, the Rambam says, some guy is going around telling these people that because they have confessed allegiance to the Prophet Muhammad, they're done as Jews. And any mitzvot that they do now, if they show up to shul, they do anything, those are all further transgressions. That's just adding insult to injury with respect to God. Anything that they do now, and any attempt they make to try to make things right or make things a little bit better. And the Rambam is like, this is the most pernicious thing any Jew could believe. To think that because you're so fundamentally corrupt and so fundamentally failing as a Jew that it's not worth attempting to do a little bit better. He says no, and he mentions, like, Yeravam ben Nevat, like Yeravam is that are like among the worst sinners of Jewish history, the most consequential sinners of Jewish history, and yet Chazal praise him for doing very small mitzvot. And the Rambam says, look, if you think you are so corrupted as a Jew and so irredeemable, it doesn't matter. Just go do the next mitzvah. Go daven. Go show up in shul. And if you do show up in shul, you should be embraced, because, yeah, you've done all kinds of bad things, and maybe like really fundamental, awful, just betrayals of the rest of the Jewish community, and your standing as a Jew. It doesn't matter. Still, do the mitzvah, because that still counts. And so there's the other text was an amazing, very short passage in the Psikta. It says, Imasita chavilos shel averos. If you've done bundles of sins, transgressions, asay kenegdan. And so, like, you think, well, shoot, I've done bundles and bundles and bundles of sins, and so what's the point of trying to be better? And the Midrash says, well, asay kenegdan chavilos shel mitzvot. If you've done bundles of averot, do bundles of mitzvot after that. The right response to having sinned is to do good things. And like, they don't cancel each other out. That doesn't mean you didn't do the bad things, but the fact that you did the bad things doesn't mean you don't have the opportunity to do good things going forward. And it's both that you still can do good things. It means something if you do good things, and the meaning isn't canceled by the fact that you've transgressed in the past. But also, it's a responsibility. Like, you're not let off the hook just because you've done bad things in the past. It doesn't matter. Like, you still need to do the next good thing. And so, making it more radical, where you were going, like, it's so natural to think, well, we're fundamentally sinful beings, and within the frame we were talking about before, we are fundamentally self-obsessed, egocentric, focused on our own advantages and our own what's good for us. It can feel like it's simply not possible for us to genuinely, sincerely commit ourselves to the Dvar Hashem and to doing Torah mitzvahs just because they matter, or doing anything just because it matters, because we're so pervasively entangled in terrestrial pursuits. But the message I think we're both coming to is that no, Hashem knew full well who he was giving the Torah to. Giving the Torah to human beings, and human beings have always been enmeshed and entangled in crass terrestrial pursuits and trying to make ends meet and trying to get ahead. That's always been true, and that's precisely who Hashem gave the Torah to. And so, then it's not just that we need to we're not going to negate our nature as human beings and trying to be angels. So God's not asking us to do that either. God's asking us as human beings to try to do a little bit better today than we did yesterday, and then again tomorrow.
To end off, can you talk a little bit about the role of irony and playfulness?
Yeah, so I mean, we could spend we can do another episode on this too. I think that's just part of there's a psychoanalytic background and a philosophical background. The philosophical tradition, this comes from Socrates and his use of irony in opening people towards new registers of meaning or questions that they hadn't asked. And then there's a psychoanalytic strand here also, which I'm getting from Jonathan Lear as a major psychoanalytic philosopher he's contemporary thinker. And then what's needed, this goes back to your point, Don, also, what's needed to just to be a realized authentic human being is a kind of openness, a kind of questioning of who we are and what our identities are and what they entail. And again, you can look at who you are at present and say, well, I'm this kind of person. I do this set of things. And then ask, well, am I righteous or am I wicked? Or, just mediocre or something, whatever it is. You grade yourself on the scale. But then if you think that way, there's no particular reason. So either you're going to be stuck. I'm this kind of person. Or you would say, well, I want to be a different kind of person. And I'm going to try to jump from being the less desirable kind of person to being good. So I'm the kind of person who is solely focused on getting ahead, and I want to be a person who's fully focused on Torah and mitzvot or beauty or what truly matters. So I'm just going to try to force myself through just discipline to be the better kind of person. And that's not going to work either, because that doesn't get to what's actually going on underneath the hood. It doesn't get to what's holding you where you are, and doesn't open you towards, it doesn't make a real path towards anything moving forward. And the idea is that what opens us to that is the kind of open-ended horizon, the ability to explore, the ability to just see new things, to move forward, is being able to just step back from ourselves and not celebrate ourselves and not condemn ourselves, but just to kind of see ourselves and achieve a kind of reflective distance. And that is irony, and that comes with an ability to laugh a little bit and say we're really silly. And the playfulness comes from it just is the ability to ask, well, how else could I be given who I am? What other things could I try today? What other ideas should I be exploring? What else is interesting? And asking that, like, not with the insistent pressure of I need to get a result right now, because that's not going to work. That's not going to help. What you need is just the ability to, it's childlike. We're trying to recover a sense of childhood, which is part of what we lose when we're forced into like the modern contemporary workforce, where everything again needs to be calibrated towards marketing ourselves as commodities, and there's a kind of seriousness about it all. Ability to step back and say, like, whatever I was going to do today, it matters. I have to do it, but also it doesn't matter ultimately. And I can step back and just like ask, does this really matter? Or how does it matter? And what way does it matter? What else matters to me? And I can play a little bit. I can try a new hat on. Today I'm going to be the guy who spends a little extra time in the basement. I'm going to be the guy who reads a book or looks at a piece of art or listens to a beautiful piece of music or spends time talking to a friend, not because I have some plan in mind or not because there's something I'm going to get out of it or there's some end I'm going to realize, but just because it's like, it feels good and it feels like something that I ought to do or I want to do or that is maybe meaningful, and I'm going to try it out and then see where it goes. And the sense of like not needing to know what the end is, not needing to have a plan, I think that's precisely part of what I'm trying to articulate, what I'm trying to move towards, is that we don't always need to, like, God has a plan. Angels have a plan. They have a task, they do the task, or they fail the task and then do it again. Human beings aren't like that. There's no, the kind of truth we're after is the terrestrial kind, the kind that flourishes from the ground. And so it's always going to be like, we're just going to try to figure out something new the next day that's a little bit better, a little bit more interesting, a little bit more beautiful. And that requires, or just is, playfulness, I think.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you, Don. This was so helpful and so enriching, and we should do it again.